Hey guys, Ted McGrath. So I want to share with you some of the top ways for getting booked. And one of the kind of the secrets behind getting booked of how you actually can grow your business exponentially. And so one of the hot methods in the marketplace is, getting booked on different podcasts, but getting on the podcast and getting booked isn't necessarily the best way that you make sales in your business or even grow your leads on your list for that matter. Um, it is getting booked that leads to that, but I'm going to share with you a unique new method that I've created, and I've been doing it for the last 10 years in every forum to get booked. And how, when you get booked, whether you get booked on stages or booked on webinars or booked on podcasts, how getting booked is the key to actually creating the relationship with the podcast host, and the relationship that you get with the podcast host is actually the thing that leads to doing a ton more business. Okay. So I'll give you just a couple of examples of that. Early on in my career, when I was starting out, and in the last several years, I've reached about 50 million people online. And when I started out early in my career, and I wasn't advertising and I wasn't marketing all the time, I wanted to get booked. And so there were a lot of people that I was working with, or I wanted to work with, that were like A-listers. And at the time, I didn't have a name in the industry. And so I would reach out to friends who knew A-listers and find out different ways that I could help them and add value to them. And so if they were putting on an event, I would find out ways I could promote an event with them to add referrals to their network. I would find ways to add value to them so that I could get on the radar, and that would often get me booked. In fact, I did it one time with a thought leader, and it ended up getting me booked. And I did something like 42 sales at $1,000 a pop on this person's webinar. This was years back, and then eventually I got booked on this person's stage, and then eventually I got booked on this person's stage again. And so that one relationship, added like 2,300 leads to my list in one promotion. That one relationship led to, probably a couple 100,000 in income. And this was early in my career. And so getting booked has been a primary way, whether for me, it's been getting booked on stages, getting booked on webinars, getting booked on podcasts. I just reached out to a friend of mine who's well known in the AI space. I was just like, hey, I want to have you on my podcast in December. And we're friends and we talk about business. But when you get somebody booked on your podcast as well, you get to have meaningful conversations. And so you start to talk about things and you learn more about their business. And one of the best things is to interview somebody about their actual business, because you learn all about it. You get to see where the opportunities are. I think this was about maybe a year ago. I got introduced to a guy who's built, several 8-figure businesses. And through the introduction, I was like, hey, I want to have you on my podcast. And so I had him on my podcast, and I was learning all about his business. And as we were talking and sharing after we got off the podcast, we started to talk even more about different ways to do business together. He's like, hey, just send me your stuff and I'll promote you out to 60,000 people on my list. So the relationships that you develop by either getting booked on somebody's podcast, or the relationships that you develop by having somebody on your podcast. Like my friend that I just reached out to, I'm like, hey, come on my podcast. I want to interview you about AI stuff. I'll send it out to my list afterwards. And my list is a couple 100,000 people. Active subscribers on my list is 113,000 people. And so as a result of having this person on my podcast, we'll connect. We always talk about doing business anyway, and then we'll forge a deeper relationship, and we'll figure out a way to do something business-wise or promotional-wise. Okay. So here's kind of the formula of either getting booked on podcasts to actually help amplify your income and amplify your leads, or having people on your podcasts to help develop more relationships so that you can actually do more business, make more income, get more leads. So the formula is really simple. Okay. Whether you want to get booked on a stage, somebody's webinar where you can sell something, or even get booked on a podcast where you're going to come talk for a little bit and probably give away something for free. The basic formula is this: anybody that you want to get booked on their podcast or on their stage or on their webinar, you need to figure out if they're an A-lister and you don't have a way in. You need to figure out the one person you know that is connected to a lot of people. Okay, I've done this throughout my career over and over and over again. Doing this got me booked on dozens and dozens of stages. And so you need to find a connector if you're not in with the A-list group yet, who can get you in front of these people, number one. Number two, the first thing that you're going to do when you get in front of an A-lister is you're not going to ask for anything. You're going to give. Okay. When you get in front of an A-list person and you want to do business with them, you don't ask for stuff. You give, and you give. And if you keep giving to an A-lister, eventually they'll turn around and say, what can I do for you? Okay. This has happened to me multiple times where I've given to A-listers, whether it's sending referrals to their events, whether it's adding value to them on some area of expertise or knowledge that I have. But if you want to get booked on A-listers podcasts, or you want to get booked on A-lister stages, add massive amounts of value to them and help them. Eventually they will turn around and say to you, how can I help you? And then when they turn around to you and say, how can I help you? You need to have your ask ready. So number one, you need to have a topic. So if you're going to get on a podcast or you're going to get on a stage, you need to know exactly what your topic is. Number two, you need to have 3 things in your back pocket, right? One of my friends booked me on like a 600-person stage years ago. I was sitting there helping her because she wanted some help on her message. And she was showing me her event that was coming up, and there was like 15 speakers. And I said, oh, there's like 3 black boxes. What's up with the 3 black boxes? And she's like, oh, I don't have speakers for that yet. I said, oh, let me ask you a question. I said, how many people do I need to put in your seminar room to get booked on your stage? And so I was saying, how many people do I need to put in your seminar room to get booked on your stage? And as I was asking her that question, she was intrigued because I was willing to put people in her seminar room. And she goes, well, what would you speak on? And so I had 3 under one topic, right? I had basically 3 areas that I could speak on, right? So I was like, I could speak on this. She's like, we got somebody for that. I'm like, I could speak on this. She's like, I don't know about that. I go, I could speak on this. She goes, oh, that might work. So the formula is, if you're going to get in front of an A-list person, you need to have 3 different areas that you could potentially speak on. So at that moment, when you've added lots of value to them and they're like, hey, how could I return the favor? You're like, hey, I'd love to, is there any chance you could promote me? And they're like, what are you thinking? Maybe you could promote me on your webinar. Maybe you could promote me on your podcast. And so what happens is, when you get a chance to get in front of an A-list person, you have 3 topics that you could potentially promote to their audience. So when they ask you the first one and they don't like it, you have a second one. They ask you the second one, like, They ask you the third time's the charm. Okay. So those are the things that work. Every time that I've done this, and then I've gotten in with an A-lister, rather than just getting booked, like let's say you're a B-lister or C-lister, and you're like, I want to go get booked on a stage and nobody knows you, or you want to get booked on a podcast and nobody knows you, you're going to get booked with other C-listers, right? But if you learn how to get in with other A-listers, and you find a way to get connected with them, either paying to go to their events, you have somebody who connects you to them, and you have something to offer them, ways to add value to them. You add value to the A-listers, eventually develop a relationship with them. And then if you add massive amounts of value, they will turn to you and say, hey, what do you think I could promote you on to support you? Or how could I support you? And at that time, you need to have your ask ready of the topics that you're going to promote. In the different scenarios where I've done this, I told you somebody promoted me out to a list of 200,000 people, which led to multiple 6 figures of income for me over time. I've had stages that I've been booked on that have led to 6 figures as a result of it. And so the opportunity to make income and grow your list isn't necessarily the podcast appearance all the time. The podcast is a vehicle to develop really good relationships. And when you develop really good relationships with the podcast hosts, then as a result of those relationships with the podcast hosts, you'll do business with them. And people who typically have podcasts or have large audiences, one, if you do business with them, they'll promote you to their email list, which is huge. Okay. Number 2, they might put you on their stage. Or number 3, you might do business with them and form some type of partnership that helps you multiply your income. So the true way to actually double, triple, quadruple, 5x your income that you would make off a podcast is not necessarily the podcast you get booked on. It's the relationship with the person that you're going to get booked with. Okay. And the moment you develop that relationship, that's when you start doing business with that person. And that's where you 10x your income. That's where you 10x your lead growth. Okay. I can look at any of those scenarios, like the one I told you earlier on, where that more than, that grew my list by a massive size when I was first starting out, simply because I added value to somebody who had a massive list, a massive network, and I developed a relationship with them. And then as a result of the relationship, they promoted me on multiple platforms, stages, webinars, all kinds of stuff. So that's the way I would recommend doing it. It's kind of like also you hosting your own podcast. Hosting your own podcast is a great way to get those types of relationships that you want on there, and then forge relationships so you can do business with those people. But again, get booked on A-list stuff, because one A-lister will help you make more income, grow your list by more, grow your audience by more, do more for you with one A-lister than you trying to do podcasts or get booked on podcasts with 100 or even 500 C-listers. Make sense? So the whole game is playing out. All right. That's the way that getting booked on podcasts helps you, because it's the relationship with the podcast host that eventually helps multiply your business if you get connected with an A-list podcaster. Make sense? So that's how I would do it. Just moments before I came on, I reached out to my buddy. He's got a massive network. I'm like, hey, come on my podcast. We're friends. We talk once a month. But being on a podcast, I'll learn what's happening with his business. I'll go deeper into his business, and we'll find additional ways to partner together and make income. It's just what happens. Particularly in an interview, you learn way more about a person. You learn way more about their business. You learn way more about their network. And that type of understanding and knowledge of somebody's business, their audience, their network opens up more opportunities for you and them to do business. And that behind the scenes business that you do will make you more money than any podcast appearance ever will. Make sense? Okay. Hope this serves you, and I'll see you guys soon. Somebody says, do you have any tips on how not only reach out to A-listers, but really connect with them so they take you seriously? Yeah. The tip for A-listers is really simple. Figure out a way you can add 10 times the value to them. That's it. Okay. And 10 times the value is not like, hey, would you promote me? That's not any value at all. They don't want to promote you. Right. And so 10 times the value is not like, hey, could you take a look at my thing? I've got this really cool product. It could be a multi-million-dollar idea. The A-lister is the way to add power to them is if you add 10 times the power to them, they then notice you, right? But if you don't do 10 times the power, they're not noticing you because they're playing at such a different level. So what you do needs to be extraordinary to get their attention, okay? Like I told you, one of my friends did an event and I sent over 20 referrals. I didn't know him that well at the time. He had reached out to me to sell me into the event. And then I sent him 20 referrals. And as a result of sending him 20 referrals, I got his attention. I developed a relationship. And then eventually I got promoted to his list. I got on multiple stages of his and developed a great connection with him ever since. So that's how you create relationships for life. You do stuff like that. Okay. Had I not sent him 20 high-end referrals for his event, I never would have gotten on his radar. Okay. So figure out ways where you can help them exponentially. And by helping them exponentially, then you'll get on the radar. And whoever's connected to them, you probably have some friend that has some connection to them that can get to them, and find out a way that you can start adding value to that person. Also, you go to their events. You can meet these people at their seminars or their events, or if you show up on a virtual event, you're like, hey, tell me about your next event coming up. I'd love to help promote it. And you promote their events. You meet them in person. What could you do? What could you swap with them? My go-to in terms of swapping with people when I was starting out was I decided to do seminars. And when I first started out, I was able to build up my seminars, particularly locally, to like 80 people in a room. And so I was able to get the attention of some like A-listers who are really good at selling from the stage. And I would go to their events like, hey, do you want to come to my event to sell from the stage? And so I developed some really good relationships just by having them on my stage. And then I got noticed. And after putting this person on my stage like 4 or 5 times, then I asked, hey, do you think I could be on your stage? She put me on her stage in front of 220 people. Okay. You know, I remember promoting somebody's books and buying like $15,000 worth of books to help this person become a bestseller at one point. And then as a result, I got on their stage with 300 and something people. And you know, that stage, even though I couldn't sell or do anything, it led to, you know, $40,000+ of income like immediately for people who just came up to me. And then I eventually enrolled them in coaching programs. So it's always about how do you add 10 times the value to a super affluent person or a person who has a large network. That's basically the game. Okay. And that's how you get in. And once you get on one, you know, then you can meet others and others, and then you grow your influence and power. And then, you know, get them on your podcast. You know, even if you don't have a large audience, like for me, if I interview somebody, I'll promote them out to 113,000 active subscribers, you know? So it's a great way to flow power. All right. Hope this serves you, and see you guys soon.